They told my grandmother to stay quiet until the truth stopped everything. I remember the exact moment my grandmother stopped speaking at family gatherings. It was my uncle's birthday dinner. Nothing special. Just one of those obligatory Sunday meals everyone pretended to enjoy. The table was full. Plates clinked, conversations overlapped, and the television hummed quietly in the background. My grandmother sat at the far end, her hands folded neatly in her lap, posture straight the way it had always been. She tried to say something about the house. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. She simply said, "That house was never meant to be." My aunt cut her off mid-sentence without even looking at her. "Mom, please," she said, waving her fork dismissively. "We've already discussed this. Let's not confuse things." No one defended her. No one asked what she meant. My grandmother's mouth closed slowly, and she nodded once, as if reminding herself of a rule she had already learned. After that, she didn't speak for the rest of the meal. Neither did I. That house came up often after that. It was my grandparents' home, the one my grandfather built with his own hands decades earlier. After he passed, my grandmother stayed there alone, even as her health declined. The family talked about the house like it was already theirs, dividing it up in casual conversations, assigning rooms, debating renovations. They spoke over her every time. When she tried to remind them that she was still alive, still capable, they smiled tightly and changed the subject. They told her not to worry. They told her they would handle things. They told her it was better if she didn't stress herself. Stress, apparently, was asking questions. As the years passed, the pattern became familiar. At holidays, my grandmother was seated away from the center of the table. When decisions were made, they were made without her. When papers were signed, she was told they were just formalities. When she asked for clarification, someone always said, "Trust us." They treated her silence like consent, and me. I was the one they relied on when something unpleasant needed doing. Driving her to appointments, picking up prescriptions, sitting in hospital waiting rooms while the rest of the family claimed they were too busy. They praised me for being responsible, for being dependable, but never included me in conversations that mattered. It was understood that I was there to serve, not to speak. The first time I noticed something was wrong was during a routine hospital visit. My grandmother had been admitted overnight for observation after a fall. Nothing serious, they said. When I arrived the next morning, she was already dressed, sitting upright in bed, purse neatly placed beside her. "You should look in the drawer," she told me quietly. I didn't ask why. I opened the bedside drawer and found a folder, thin but carefully organized. Inside were copies of documents I didn't recognize at the time, old property records, handwritten notes, and something labeled trust addendum. I looked at her, confused. "They think I don't understand," she said. "They think I forgot." She didn't explain further. She didn't need to. That was the first time I realized her silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. At the next family gathering, my aunt announced that my grandmother would be moving soon. They framed it as a kindness. The house was too big, too old, too much work. They had already found a smaller place, closer to everyone. My grandmother was sitting right there while they discussed her life like a schedule change. I watched her carefully. She nodded politely, thanked them for their concern, and said nothing else. After dinner, my cousin joked that my grandmother was lucky the family was taking care of things before it got complicated. I remember thinking that it already was complicated, just not for the people benefiting from it. Over the next few months, the pressure increased. Papers were brought to my grandmother to sign, always presented quickly, always explained vaguely. When she hesitated, she was told she was being difficult. When she asked to read them, someone sighed dramatically. "She doesn't need to worry about legal details," my uncle said once. "We're family." Family, apparently, didn't require transparency. I was there for all of it. I said nothing, not because I agreed, but because I was watching. I was learning who spoke, who decided, and who assumed the silence meant ignorance. They underestimated both of us. The turning point came quietly. My grandmother asked me to take her to see an old friend of my grandfather's, a man who had helped him with legal matters years ago. He was retired now, but his memory was sharp. He recognized my grandmother immediately and listened patiently as she explained what had been happening. He asked one question that no one else had bothered to ask. "Did they show you the final version?" he said. She shook her head. He sighed and told us to come back the following week. That meeting changed everything. The truth was simple, which made it devastating. Years earlier, my grandparents had placed the house and certain assets into a trust. It was designed to protect my grandmother, not bypass her. The documents my family had been circulating were incomplete, selective, missing clauses that required her explicit, informed consent for any transfer or sale. Consent they never had. More importantly, there was an addendum one my grandmother had signed privately that named me as the executor should her competence ever be questioned. They didn't know that the next family meeting was called under the guise of finalizing arrangements. Everyone arrived confident, prepared to wrap things up neatly. My grandmother sat quietly, hands folded, eyes steady. I sat beside her, the folder in my bag heavier than it looked. When my uncle slid the papers across the table, my grandmother didn't reach for them. Instead, she looked at me and nodded. I placed the folder on the table and opened it. The room changed immediately. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. As I explained, calmly and clearly, the color drained from their faces. The retired attorney had joined us via video call, confirming every detail. The trust, the addendum, the invalidity of the documents they had tried to use. The silence that followed was absolute. No one apologized. They didn't need to. The consequences spoke for themselves. The sale they had been planning was halted. The move they had arranged was cancelled. The authority they assumed they had vanished in an instant. My grandmother sat there the entire time, saying nothing, watching them absorb the reality they had avoided. When it was over, she stood up slowly, took her purse, and thanked everyone for coming. That was it. In the weeks that followed, things shifted permanently. Invitations stopped coming. Calls went unanswered. Decisions were no longer shared with us because they were no longer theirs to make. My grandmother remained in her home. I remained by her side. We didn't confront anyone. We didn't explain ourselves again. We didn't need closure from people who only valued silence when it benefited them. My grandmother speaks more now, but only when she chooses to. She no longer tries to correct people who don't listen. She no longer wastes words on those who confuse patience with weakness. As for me, I learned something I won't forget. Silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes it means preparation. And when the truth finally speaks, it doesn't need to raise its voice.